The silence beneath my feet was louder than any cry of pain I had ever heard. It's not a paradox, it's the truth. Pain, you can still fight it, you can name it, hate it. But silence. Silence is emptiness. It is absence. It is the slow death of a part of you, a gradual erasure that turns you into a ghost inside your own life. I looked at my feet, motionless at the edge of the bed, and felt nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was like looking at two pieces of marble that were attached to my body, and the panic it caused me was a cold wave that ran up my spine and froze my heart. I was afraid to fall asleep, because I was afraid of waking up and finding that the silence had risen to my knees, then to my waist, until it swallowed me whole. This video is not about resignation. It's not about learning to live with an incurable evil. It's about a discovery, one I made late, almost too late, one that allowed me to break that terrifying silence and feel the ground beneath my feet again. And I promise you, what I'm about to reveal here is not what you expect. It's not a new magic pill advertised on television, nor is it complicated surgery. It's something much more fundamental. It's about understanding the secret language of your own body, a language that modern medicine, with all its technology, seems to have forgotten how to listen to. Stay with me, because the answer I found may be the answer you're desperately searching for. Life before the silence was normal. And that is its greatest beauty and its greatest tragedy, the normality that we only appreciate when we lose it. I remember the feel of wet grass on my bare feet in the morning, a simple, almost childlike sensation, but one that connected me to the world. I remember climbing stairs with shopping bags, 2 steps at a time, feeling the strength in my calves, a strength I thought was infinite, guaranteed. Walking was like breathing, something I did without thinking. It was the basis of everything. Walking to the car, strolling in the park, standing for hours talking to friends at a party. My feet and legs were my foundation, the invisible foundation of my independence. I never gave them a second thought. They were just there, working, taking me where I wanted to go, supporting me, allowing me to be me. We never think about the complex symphony of muscles, nerves, and blood vessels that work in perfect harmony to allow us to take a single step. It's a miracle we ignore every day. And I was the master of ignorance. If that feeling that something precious is slipping through your fingers sounds familiar, I invite you to join me on this journey. Click subscribe, because what we are about to discover together could change everything. The first sign wasn't thunder, it was a whisper. One night, lying in bed, I felt a strange tingling in my right big toe. It lasted a few seconds and went away. I thought, I must have slept in a weird position. A week later, a violent cramp in my calf woke me up in the middle of the night. I jumped out of bed, writhing in pain, and when it passed, I massaged the sore muscle and blamed dehydration or the previous day's exertion. These were convenient excuses, little lies we tell ourselves so we don't have to face an inconvenient truth. The truth is that our bodies are polite. They don't scream from one moment to the next. They warn us. They send little messengers, subtle signs that something is wrong. But we are deaf. We are too busy, too stressed, too proud to admit that our strength, our body, may have a crack in its foundation. I started to stumble from time to time. Silly things. A step I didn't see, the edge of the carpet. I laughed at myself, saying I was getting clumsy. But deep down, a small seed of anxiety was planted. The feeling that my feet weren't responding as quickly as they used to. But I buried it under the daily routine. The search for answers began when I could no longer ignore the signs. My first mistake was to believe it would be simple. I went to one doctor, then another, and another. The journey turned into a roller coaster of frustration. The first told me it was stress and gave me a muscle relaxant. It didn't work. The second, a specialist, ran a series of tests and said I had a beginning spinal problem and prescribed strong painkillers. The pain subsided a little, but the tingling got worse, and now a feeling of numbness was beginning to set in. The third doctor, after more tests, came up with a different diagnosis, something related to the peripheral nerves, and gave me another type of medication, one that messed with my brain chemistry to mask the pain signals. I felt drugged, slow, and the silence in my feet only increased. Each visit was the same: a cold waiting room, 10 minutes of attention, a new prescription, a new hope that died within a few weeks. My medicine cabinet looked like a pharmacy: pills for pain, pills for inflammation, pills for sleep, and nothing, absolutely nothing addressed the root cause of the problem. I felt like a car with a warning light flashing on the dashboard, and every mechanic, instead of opening the hood to look at the engine, simply put a black sticker over the light so I couldn't see it anymore. The search that should have been for a cure became a frustrating search for someone who would really listen to me, who would connect the dots, who would see beyond the isolated symptoms. But I only found specialists in parts of the body, not specialists in the whole body. They saw the pain, the numbness, the weakness, but they didn't see the frightened man who was literally losing his footing. I was alone, adrift in a sea of conflicting information and solutions that solved nothing. Hope was fading, and fear was beginning to take its place. The mystery deepened with each passing day, and my body became a crime scene that no one could decipher. The 3 signs, the ones mentioned in the title of this video, became the macabre protagonists of my life. They dictated my mood, my activities, my future. The first sign was what I called cotton floor. It started subtly. I would walk and feel as if there were an extra very thick sock between my skin and the floor. Over time, that sock turned into a thick layer of cotton. I lost all sensation. I couldn't feel the texture of the carpet, the coldness of the tile, the heat of the asphalt. Once, I stepped on a piece of glass in the kitchen and didn't notice until hours later when I saw the trail of blood on the floor. The panic I felt at that moment was indescribable, not because of the pain, but because of the absence of it. My natural alarm system was turned off. I could have seriously injured myself and not even known it. This numbness robbed me of my confidence. I walked hesitantly, my eyes fixed on the floor, trying to compensate with my vision for what my feet could no longer tell me. Each step was a gamble. The second sign was the polar opposite of the first, and this duality drove the doctors and me crazy. They were the needles of fire. During the day, silence and numbness. But at night, when I lay down, my feet and legs took on a life of their own, a life of torture. Thousands of incandescent needles seemed to pierce my skin from the inside out. A burning sensation that made me kick the air, throw the blankets away, get up and walk around the house in the dark, seeking relief on the cold floor. But the floor that was like cotton during the day offered no comfort at night. It was the cruelest of ironies. I longed to feel the floor, but when the sensation came, it was in the form of excruciating pain. The nights became hell. I was afraid to go to bed. Sleep, which should have been a refuge, became my battlefield. And the sleep deprivation began to destroy me mentally, leaving me irritable, anxious, and hopeless during the day. How could I have a total absence of sensation and, at the same time, such excruciating pain in the same place? No expert could give me a logical answer. They gave me pain pills, which made me groggy but did not extinguish the fire. The third sign was the most terrifying, the one that showed me I was on the brink of the abyss, the sudden weakness. This wasn't a constant feeling, it was an unpredictable collapse. I would be walking normally and suddenly my knee would give way. My leg would simply turn off for a fraction of a second. The first few times, I was able to keep my balance. But one day, climbing a flight of stairs, my leg gave way and I rolled down the steps. The fall itself wasn't serious, just a few scratches and bruised pride, but the symbolic fall was devastating. At that moment, sprawled on the floor looking up, I understood. I was no longer in control. My body was actively betraying me. Stairs became my enemy. A simple uneven sidewalk became a minefield. The idea of leaving the house began to generate paralyzing anxiety. What if I fell in the middle of the street? What if I couldn't get up? The independence I valued so much was crumbling, being replaced by a constant and humiliating fear. These three signs together formed an impossible puzzle: numbness, excruciating pain, and weakness. How could a single problem cause such contradictory symptoms? It was as if my body was screaming in 3 different languages at the same time, and no one, absolutely no one, was fluent enough to understand the message. Conventional medicine tried to treat each sign separately. One medication for the pain, another to strengthen the nerves, physical therapy for the weakness. But it was like trying to plug 3 holes in a boat using only my 2 hands. While I focused on one, the other 2 opened up even more. Frustration turned into a kind of investigative desperation. I needed to understand the pattern, the missing link that connected these 3 enemies. I knew deep down that they weren't separate problems. They were symptoms of a single deep disorder, a hidden truth that everyone was ignoring. Have you ever felt like your body was sending you mixed messages, a puzzle that no one can put together? Share in the comments what was the most confusing sign you ever ignored, or that doctors couldn't explain. My detective journey began in a sea of false leads, and the first and most common, the most insidious of all, was the universal excuse: it's just your age. Every doctor at some point mentioned it. Well, you're not 20 anymore. This phrase was said with an air of resigned wisdom, as if it were a final diagnosis, a sentence. But age is not a disease. It's a process, and this lazy explanation revolted me. It closed doors, prevented investigation, condemned us to accept decline as inevitable. I started thinking about my tree metaphor. A tree ages, its trunk gets thicker, its bark gets wrinkled. But a healthy 100-year-old tree still carries sap to its highest leaves. It doesn't accept that its leaves will die simply because it is old. If the leaves are dying, it's because there's a problem with nutrient transport, a disease, a blockage. It's not age itself, but the conditions that age can aggravate. Rejecting age as the main clue was my first act of rebellion, my first decision to take control of the investigation. I wasn't going to accept decline as my fate just because my ID said I was a certain age. There was something else, something active going on, and I was going to find out what it was. The second false clue was more technical and seemed more convincing. It's a primary nerve problem. It made sense on the surface. Numbness, pain, weakness, sounds like nerves. And this is where I spent months, maybe years, lost. I read everything about neuropathy. I took supplements for nerve health, high doses of B vitamins, alpha-lipoic acid. I did neural stimulation exercises. And while there was a tiny temporary improvement here and there, the core problem persisted and progressed. It was like changing the tires on a car that was out of gas. The tires may be new and high-tech, but the car won't run. I was polishing the electrical wires in my body, but the energy wasn't getting to them. The burning pain and numbness were indeed signs of suffering nerves. But they were the fire alarm, not the fire itself. Treating the nerves directly was like trying to silence the alarm while the house was burning. The question I began to ask myself was, what does a nerve need to live? Just as a plant needs water and light, a nerve needs 2 essential things: oxygen and nutrients. And how do these things reach the tip of my toe? The answer was obvious, but I couldn't see it, and no one pointed it out to me. I was focused on the nerves, the wires of my body. But what if the problem wasn't in the wires, but in the energy that feeds them? What if the electricity was being cut off at the source? That question was a small glimmer of light in the darkness, a trail that would lead me away from the false clues. The third false lead was the focus on the muscular system. You need to strengthen your legs, said the physical therapist. And there I went, to strengthening sessions, trying to do exercises that became increasingly difficult. Sudden weakness made some of them dangerous, and the logic seemed flawed. How could I strengthen a muscle if the command for it to contract, coming from the nerve, was faulty? What's more, how could a muscle have the energy to work if the fuel, oxygen, and nutrients wasn't getting to it in sufficient quantities? It was like yelling at a hungry and exhausted worker to work faster. It was useless. The problem wasn't the worker's lack of will, but his complete lack of resources. I was exhausting my muscles, demanding something they couldn't give me because the supply line was cut off. These 3 false leads, age, focus on nerves as the primary cause, and muscle weakness as the starting point, formed an almost insurmountable barrier. They are the pillars of conventional treatment for my symptoms, and that's why so many people suffer for years on end, jumping from one treatment to another, from one specialist to another, getting worse and worse, more frustrated, more hopeless. They are all looking in the wrong place. They are investigating the victims, the nerves and muscles, without ever looking for the real culprit, the mastermind behind the crime, the one who was silently cutting off the life force that sustained the entire periphery of my body. Dismantling these false leads was crucial. It required me to unlearn everything the experts had told me. It required me to trust my intuition, which told me that there was a single, unifying explanation for my suffering. I stopped looking for fragmented solutions and started looking for a system, for a missing link. And that search took me to unexpected places, far from doctors' offices and much closer to the fundamental logic of life itself. The turning point, the moment when the detective finally finds the clue that solves the case, did not happen in a laboratory or a doctor's office. It happened on a sleepless night, one of those torturous nights with the needles of fire, around 3 in the morning. Unable to stay in bed, I got up and went to the living room. I turned on the television at a low volume, and a nature documentary was on. It was about the giant redwood trees in California, trees over 100 meters tall and thousands of years old. And the narrator asked a question that struck me like a bolt of lightning. How does this wonder of nature defy gravity and transport hundreds of liters of water and nutrients from the deepest roots to the last leaf at the top every day for centuries? And that's when the image of a giant tree formed in my mind, but this time it was an image of clarity, not despair. My body was that tree. My heart was the pump. The main arteries were the trunk and thick branches. But the magic, the answer to the documentary's question, was not in the trunk. It was in the thinnest vessels, the almost invisible channels that form the final distribution network, the capillaries. The answer was microcirculation. At that moment, everything made sense. The 3 contradictory signs suddenly began to speak the same language. What happens to a leaf at the top of a tree if the small channel that feeds it becomes clogged or damaged? First, it stops receiving the vital sap. It loses its vitality, becomes numb, weak. It is the cotton floor. It is disconnected from the rest of the tree. Then, in a last desperate effort to survive, it sends out stress signals, signals of pain. These are the fire needles, the cry for help from a nerve that is starving, hungry for oxygen. And finally, with no energy and no communication, it can no longer perform its functions. It withers, loses its strength. It is sudden weakness. Numbness, pain, and weakness were not 3 problems. They were the 3 stages of the death of a peripheral nerve caused by a failure in blood delivery. The key clue was not age, not nerves, not muscles. The key clue was the transport system. My microcirculation was failing. The small pipes that were supposed to irrigate the extremities of my body were clogged, inflamed, damaged. That was why the medications weren't working. They didn't unclog pipes. That was why physical therapy wasn't working. It didn't restore flow. I was facing the real villain, the silent collapse of my peripheral vascular network. From that revelation, my research shifted focus dramatically. I was no longer looking for neuropathic pain relief. I began researching how to restore microcirculation, capillary regeneration, endothelial health, and a whole new world opened up. I discovered that this microscopic network is incredibly delicate. Years of silent inflammation, a less than ideal lifestyle, stress, all of these contribute to damaging the inner lining of these tiny vessels, the endothelium. This damage creates small barriers like rust inside a pipe, which slow down blood flow until it becomes insufficient. The blood, with its precious oxygen and nutrients, simply could no longer reach its final destination, the nerves and muscles in my feet and legs. This understanding empowered me. For the first time, I was no longer a victim of mysterious symptoms. I was a detective who had solved the crime. I knew what was happening inside me. And with that knowledge came the next logical question. If nature knows how to keep the capillaries of a 3,000-year-old redwood tree functioning, might it also have the answer to repair mine? That question led me to name the process I needed to activate in my body. Inspired by the resilience of that tree, I called this innate ability to regenerate the Arbor Vascular Effect. It was a personal name, a reminder of my discovery. The Arbor Vascular Effect was, for me, the reactivation of the body's biological intelligence to repair and unblock the network of microcapillaries, allowing the sap of life, oxygen-rich blood, to flow freely again to the most distant leaf, the most peripheral nerve. The solution was not an external patch, but an internal awakening. The challenge was now clear. I didn't need more painkillers. I needed to discover how to consistently and powerfully initiate my own Arbor Vascular Effect. The hunt for the key that would unlock this mechanism had begun. With the discovery of the mechanism, with the clarity of what I called the Arbor Vascular Effect, a wave of hope, the first in a long time, washed over me. I was no longer lost. I had a target. The next phase of my journey was one of experimentation, of putting theory into practice. I started out rudimentarily, like an amateur scientist in his own garage. I immersed myself in botany texts and ethnopharmacological studies, searching for natural substances historically known for their affinity with the circulatory system. I read about compounds found in certain tree barks, fruit seeds, and leaves of plants that grew in extreme conditions, plants that had to be masters of nutrient transport in order to survive. I compiled a list. I began to incorporate these foods and teas into my diet in a methodical way. It was no longer about eating healthy in a generic way. It was about ingesting specific compounds that preliminary science and ancient knowledge suggested could support blood vessel health. I drank teas made from certain leaves, ate handfuls of specific seeds, and searched for hard-to-find extracts. And then, on a Tuesday morning, about 3 weeks after starting this personal protocol, something happened. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, in my morning ritual of looking at my lifeless feet, and I felt it. An itch. A faint, almost imperceptible itch on my left little toe. I stopped, held my breath, and I tried to feel it again. And there it was. An itch. For most people, an itch is an irritation. For me, on that day, it was a miracle. It was the most glorious sound I had ever heard. Because in order to feel an itch, a nerve has to be alive. It has to be functioning, even minimally. It was a sign, a faint but undeniable sign that the connection was being reestablished. The sap was, drop by drop, beginning to reach the distant leaf. It was my first personal proof that the Arbor Vascular Effect was not just a nice concept, it was a real possibility. That small spark of success gave me the fuel to go deeper. I needed external validation. My experience was encouraging, but I needed to know if there was a solid scientific basis behind it. That's when my search took me from health food stores to scientific study databases. And what I found shocked me. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of studies published in medical and biology journals on microcirculation, endothelial function, and the exact compounds I was researching. I read about how certain flavonoids, found in tree bark, had been shown in clinical studies to strengthen capillary walls. I read about how a specific type of antioxidant, found in grape seeds for example, could protect the endothelium from oxidative damage, the rust I had imagined. I found research on amino acids that served as precursors to nitric oxide, a molecule our own bodies produce to relax and dilate blood vessels, improving flow. It was all real. Science was validating ancient knowledge. The Arbor Vascular Effect had technical and complicated names in the academic world, but the principle was the same. What's more, I found online forums and discussion groups, people from all over the world, with stories eerily similar to mine, sharing their own journeys. They talked about the same compounds, the same strategies. This social proof was immensely powerful. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy. I was on the right track. But there was a problem. A big problem. My results were inconsistent. The itching came and went. Sometimes I felt a slight warmth in my feet, but the next day, the cotton silence returned. The nights of fire needles decreased in intensity, but they didn't go away. Why? The answer came in a moment of epiphany as I tried to calculate the amount of a certain compound I was getting from a tea. The amount was minuscule. I would have to drink gallons and gallons of that tea every day to get close to the dosage that one of the studies I read used. And the same was true for the other ingredients. And that's when I understood. It was like trying to put out a forest fire with a glass of water. The water was the right thing, but the amount was negligible. To reverse years, perhaps decades, of silent microvascular damage, I didn't need a homeopathic dose. I needed a therapeutic dose. I needed the right purity and concentration of those compounds, working in synergy, every day, consistently. Doing this through food and teas was logistically impossible and financially unfeasible. I needed a fire hydrant. I needed a way to deliver these vital ingredients in the exact concentration that science had shown to be effective. And that, I concluded with absolute clarity, could only be achieved in one way: a precise encapsulated formulation that guaranteed purity, synergy, and, most importantly, the correct therapeutic dose. My search was no longer for ingredients, but for a precision tool. My investigation now had a new purpose: to find the precision tool. I was no longer looking for a magic cure, but for a biological engineering solution. I needed the exact combination of compounds that my research had revealed in the correct therapeutic dose, in a form that my body could absorb efficiently. I started researching supplements, but the market was a jungle. Hundreds of bottles, all with flashy labels and vague promises. But now, I was a trained detective. I knew what to look for. I ignored the marketing and went straight to the list of ingredients and their concentrations. Most products were disappointing. They had one or two of the ingredients I was looking for, but in tiny doses, well below the therapeutic level, or mixed with dozens of other useless compounds as fillers. It was like selling me a glass of dirty water to put out my fire. After weeks of frustrating research, I finally found it. It was a formulation from a smaller, almost niche company that seemed to be focused more on science than advertising. The label was simple, but the ingredient list was exactly what I was looking for. There were the specific extracts, the flavonoids, the antioxidants, the nitric oxide precursors, all of them, and in dosages that matched those I had seen in the successful clinical studies. It was a formula that seemed to have been created by someone who deeply understood the mechanism of the Arbor vascular effect. I ordered a bottle. When it arrived, I held it in my hands and felt a nervousness I hadn't felt in years. It was hope mixed with fear of the ultimate disappointment. I started taking the capsules religiously, as prescribed. In the first week, I didn't feel much difference. I remained patient. I knew I wasn't dealing with a painkiller. I was trying to rebuild biological infrastructure. I was asking my body to repair decades of damage. It would take time. But in the second week, something started to change. The nights of fire needles became less frequent, the intensity decreased, and the numbness began to recede. It was like a tide slowly going out, revealing the sand beneath. And then, the moment happened. The catalyst turning point. It was on a Saturday morning. I woke up, stretched, and out of habit, moved my feet under the sheet. And I felt it. I felt the texture of the fabric. Not a phantom sensation, not an itch. I felt the weave of the cotton, slightly rough, brushing against my skin. I froze. I moved my feet again, and there it was. A real, tactile, unmistakable sensation. I threw the sheets aside, sat up in bed, and put my feet on the wooden floor. And for the first time in years, I felt the smoothness and temperature of the wood. Tears began to stream down my face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of such deep relief, of such overwhelming gratitude, that it felt like a dam had broken inside me. The silence had been broken. The sound of life was returning. And in that moment, with the feel of the cool wood on my feet and the tears on my face, I needed to pause. I needed to talk to you, directly, because I know you understand what losing that feeling means. I know what it's like to live in fear of the next step, in fear of the next night, and because I know that, I need to share what worked. If what I've said so far resonates with your journey, If you felt a glimmer of the hope I felt, then give me your trust for one more moment and click subscribe, because the most important step comes now. Your body, just like mine, has a physiological window of opportunity. The nerves that are asleep today, suffering in silence, may be lost forever tomorrow. There is a point where the damage becomes irreversible. The time to act, to reopen these vital channels, to activate your own arbor vascular effect, is now, while the connection still exists, however weak it may be. Don't wait for the silence to become permanent. I spent months, years, being a guinea pig for myself, testing theories, wasting money on solutions that didn't work, and worst of all, wasting precious time. I know what works and what is just empty promise. And that's why, not as a salesman, but as someone who has walked through the same desert as you, I feel compelled to point out the oasis I found. I have condensed all my research, my entire journey, into a single recommendation. The exact formulation, with the purity and therapeutic dose I needed to achieve real results, is available in one place. I can't promise a cure overnight, but I can show you the path I followed to rebuild my foundation, step by step. I've left a link for you in the description below this video and also in the first pinned comment. Click on it when the video is over. See for yourself. The information is there. The decision is yours. Now let me finish my story. That moment, feeling the wooden floor, was not the end. It was the beginning of a new life. The walk from my bed to the bathroom that day was the longest and most beautiful of my life. Every step was a celebration. Weakness was the last thing to go. As my blood flow improved, my muscles got the fuel they needed. The legs that had once given way now held me steady. A few weeks later, I found myself facing the stairs, my old enemy. I took a deep breath and climbed, step by step, steadily, without hesitation, without holding onto the railing. I reached the top and looked back, not with fear, but with a sense of triumph. I had won. The final scene of my journey, the image I treasure, is not dramatic. It is the simplest of all. The following summer, I was at the beach with my family. I took off my sandals and walked toward the water. And then I did something I hadn't done in a decade. I ran. I ran on the wet sand, feeling the grains squishing between my toes, feeling the strength of my muscles propelling my body forward. I ran toward the waves, and when the cold water hit my ankles, the sensation was so intense, so alive, that I stopped and laughed. A loud, free laugh that came from deep within my soul. I was back. Complete. Firmly grounded. Your story doesn't have to end in silence and fear. Your journey back to yourself can begin today. If this story has given you hope, sign up so you don't miss what's next. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and take the first step. Click on the link in the description and in the pinned comment. Reclaim your ground.